Blessed Lord, may the meditations of my heart this day be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. We turn now to John Foxe's Acts and Monuments, Volume 5, picking up with the Wycliffean period. The Archbishop, not contented with this, solicited the king to join the power of his temporal sword, for he well perceived that as yet the popish clergy did not have sufficient authority by any public law or statute of the land to proceed unto death against any person in question of religion, but only by the usurped tyranny and example of Rome. Where note, gentle reader, for better understanding the practice of Romish prelates in seeking the king's help further their bloody purpose against the good saints of God. The king, being but young and yet not arrived at years of ripe judgment, was seduced by the archbishop to give his private assent to an ordinance, which was indeed the very first law to be found against religion and the professors of it, bearing the name of an act made in Parliament held at Westminster in the 5th year of Richard II. There, among other statutes then published and still remaining in the printed books of statutes, this supposed statute is to be found. Forasmuch, and we quote here the statute, forasmuch as it is openly known that there are diverse evil persons within the realm, going from county to county and from town to town, in certain habits under dissimulation of great holiness, and without the license of the ordinaries of the place or other sufficient authority, preaching daily not only in the churches and churchyards, but also in markets, fairs, and other open places where there's a great congregation of people, diverse sermons containing heresies and notable errors, to the great blemishing of the Christian faith and destruction of the laws and estate of the Holy Church, to the great peril of the souls of the people and of all the realm of England, as is more plainly found and sufficiently proved before the Reverend Father in God, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the bishops and other prelates, masters of divinity, and doctors of canon and of civil law. And great part of the clergy of the said realm, specially assembled for the great cause. These persons also preach diverse matters of slander, who engender discord and dissension between divers estates of the said realm, spiritual as well as temporal, and exciting the people to the great peril of the whole realm. These preachers being cited and summoned before the ordinaries of their places, there to answer to that for which they are impeached, they will not obey the summons and commands, and do not care for the admonitions nor censures of the Holy Church, but expressly despise them, and moreover, by their subtle and ingenious words, they draw the people to hear their sermons and maintain them in the errors by a strong hand and by great routes. Continuing, it is ordained and assented in this present Parliament that the king's commissions be made and directed to the sheriffs and other ministers of our sovereign Lord the King, and other persons sufficiently learned and according to the certificates of the prelates to be made in the chancery from time to time, and to arrest all such preachers and also their favorers, maintainers, and abettors, and to hold them in arrest in strong prison till they justify themselves according to the law and reason of the Holy Church. And the king wills and commands that the chancellor make such commissions at all times, that by the prelates or any of them he shall be certified and required of this as aforesaid. The validity of the king's statute against Wycliffe examined. As this supposed statute was the principal ground on which proceeded all the persecution of that time, it is therefore not impertinent to examine it more particularly, by which it will appear that, as it was fraudulently and unduly devised by the prelates alone, so it was in like manner most injuriously and disorderly executed by them. For immediately upon publishing of this law, without further warrant from king or council, commissions under the great seal of England were made in this form. Richard, by the grace of God, witnessed myself at Westminster, the 26th of June in the 6th year of our reign. Without further words of warrant underwritten, such as in like cases are both usual and requisite, all or any of these words being utterly lacking in this place, as may be seen in the king's records of that time, it must therefore have been either done by warrant of this statute, or else without any warrant at all. Whereupon it is to be noted that whereas the statute appointed the commissions to be directed to the sheriff, or other ministers of the king, or to other persons sufficiently learned, for the arrest of such persons, these commissions are directed to the Archbishop and his suffragans, being parties in the case, authorizing them further, without either the words or reasonable meaning of the statute, to imprison them in their own houses or wherever else they pleased. Besides this, what manner of law this was, by whom it was devised, and by what authority it was first made and established, judged by what follows. In the utas of St. Michael next following, at a parliament summoned and held at Westminster in the 6th year of the king, among various petitions made to the king by his commons, to which he assented, there is one in this form. Article 52, that whereas a statute was made during the last parliament in these words, it is ordained in this present parliament that commissions from the king be directed to the sheriffs and other ministers of the king, or to other persons sufficiently skillful and according to the certificates of its prelates, to be made to the chancery from time to time, to arrest all such preachers and their favorers, maintainers, and abettors, and detain them in strong prison until they justify themselves according to reason and the law of the Holy Church. And the king wills and commands that the chancellor make such commissions at all times as he shall be by the prelates or any of them certified and thereof required, as is aforesaid, which was never agreed to nor granted by the commons. Whatever was moved in this was without their assent, that the said statute therefore be disannulled, for it is in not any way their meaning that either themselves or those who succeed them shall be further justified or bound by the prelates than their ancestors in former times, to which it is answered, the king is pleased. Hereby, notwithstanding that the former unjust law was repealed, and the fraud of the framers of it sufficiently revealed, yet such means were taken by the prelates that this act of repeal was never published, nor ever printed with the rest of the statutes of that parliament, so that the repeal being concealed, similar commissions and other processes were made from time to time by virtue of the statute during the whole reign of this king, as well as ever since, against the professors of religion. The young king was further induced by the importunity of the Archbishop to send special letters to the Vice Chancellor and Proctors of the University of Oxford, in which he straightly and sharply enjoins them to make a general inquisition throughout the whole university for John Wycliffe, Nicholas Hereford, Philip Repington, John Ashton, and such others, and also for whom they know or judge to be suspected of that doctrine, or the maintainers, receivers, and defenders of the parties or their opinions, with the intent that being so apprehended, they may be expelled the university within 7 days of their admonition, and cited before the Archbishop of Canterbury. Moreover, the Vice Chancellor and Proctors, with their assistants, were commanded that if any person or persons in any house, hall, or college, or in any other place be found who have any books or treatises composed by John Wycliffe, Nicholas Hereford, they will have that person or persons arrested and attached, and their books seized and presented within 1 month, without correction, corruption, or alteration, to the Archbishop, upon faith and allegiance, if they would avoid the forfeiture of all privileges of the university. The Vice Chancellor at this time in Oxford was Master Robert Riga. The two proctors were John Huntington and Walter Dish. As far as they dared, they favored the cause of John Wycliffe, so that when some public sermons at the Feast of the Ascension and of Corpus Christi were to be preached before the people in the cloister of St. Fridswin, now called Christ Church, by the Vice Chancellor and the Proctors, they committed it to Philip Repington and Nicholas Hereford. Hereford would preach on Ascension Day and Repington on Corpus Christi Day. Hereford was observed to defend Wycliffe openly as a faithful, good, and innocent man, at which there were great outcries among the friars. Hereford after had long favored and maintained Wycliffe's part, grew in suspicion among the enemies of truth. For as soon as he began somewhat liberally and freely to utter anything which tended to the defense of Wycliffe, by and by the Carmelites and all the orders of religion were on his watch, and they laid not a few heresies to his charge, which they had strained here and there out of his sermons. After this, the feast of Corpus Christi drew near. On this day, it was expected that Repington would preach. This man was a canon of Leicester, who protested openly that in all moral matters he would defend Wycliffe, but as to the sacrament he would hold his peace until such time as the Lord otherwise illuminated the hearts and minds of the clergy. Now the day of Corpus Christi was approaching when, as the friars understood this man would preach, they arranged with the Archbishop of Canterbury that on the same day, a little before Philip was to preach, Wycliffe's conclusions, which were privately condemned, would be openly defamed in the presence of the whole university. These things being done, Philip Repington, at the hour appointed, proceeded to his sermon. Among many other things in it, he was reported to have uttered these statements to this effect: that popes should not be exalted above temporal lords, that in moral matters he would defend Master Wycliffe as a true Catholic doctrine, that the Duke of Lancaster was earnestly affected and minded in this matter, and wished that all such should be received under his protection, besides many more things which touched the praise and defense of Wycliffe. And in his sermon, at the conclusion, he dismissed the people with this sentence: I well in the speculative doctrine pertaining to the altar keep silence and hold my peace until such time as God otherwise instructs and illuminates. the hearts of the clergy. When the sermon was done, Repington entered into St. Fridward's church, accompanied with many of his friends who, as their enemies surmised, were privately armed under their garments against danger. Friar Stokes, the Carmelite, who was the chief champion against Wycliffe, suspecting all of this to be against him, kept within the sanctuary of the church. The Vice Chancellor and Repington, friendly greeting one another in the church porch, sent away the people, and so every man departed home to his house. There was not a little joy through the whole university for that sermon. But in the meantime, the unquiet and busy Carmelite did not let go of it. For by his letters, he declared the whole matter to the Archbishop, exaggerating the danger that he'd been. Desiring his help and aid, he omitted nothing to move and stir up the bishop's mind, who of his own nature was ready enough to prosecute the matter. The Vice Chancellor was later accused of contempt of the Archbishop's letters. When he perceived that no excuse would prevail to avoid the danger, he humbled himself upon his knees, desiring pardon. Once he had obtained it by the help of the Bishop of Winchester, he was sent away again with certain commands and suspensions of heretics. Then the hatred on both sides began to appear and develop itself. All men were offended at these friars and monks, to whom they imputed whatever trouble or mischief was raised up, as the authors and causers of it. Nicholas Hereford and Philip Repington, being secretly warned by the Vice Chancellor, conveyed themselves out of sight and fled to the Duke of Lancaster. But the Duke, whether for fear or some other cause I cannot say, in the end forsook his poor and miserable clients. Being repulsed by the Duke and destitute of his support, they went to the Archbishop. Whether they were sent or did it of their own accord is uncertain. But Repington was reconciled again to the Archbishop and admitted to the university. So was John Ashton. I find no specific mention of Nicholas Hereford all the while. In the meantime, about the 23rd of September, 1382, the king sent his mandate to the Archbishop for collecting a subsidy and to have a convocation of the clergy summoned against the next Parliament, which would begin 18 November. All of this being done, the Parliament was assembled at Oxford, where the convocation was held in the monastery of Fridward. The Archbishop with other bishops, sitting there in their pontifical robes, declared two causes of their present assembly. One was to repress heresies, which began afresh in the realm, and the other to aid and support the king with some subsidy of money. The convocation being continued the next day, the Archbishop with other prelates assembled themselves as before. The Archbishop, after the usual solemnity, desired the proctors of the clergy, appointed for every diocese, to consult among themselves in some convenient place what they thought regarding the redress of matters, and to be notified and declared to him and his brethren. Further, he says, it was rumored throughout the realm that there were certain ones in the University of Oxford who held and maintained heretical and erroneous conclusions, condemned by him and by other lawyers and doctors of divinity. He therefore assigned the bishops of Sarum, Hereford, and Rochester, with William Rugga, then Vice Chancellor of the University of Oxford, for Robert Riga was probably displaced, and also William Burton and John Middleton, doctors, giving them his full authority, including cursing and banning, to compel them to search and acquire with all diligence in all possible ways over all and every individual whosoever, whether doctors, bachelors, or scholars of the university, who taught, maintained, or defended in or out of the schools the conclusions mentioned above. On that day, in the presence of the prelates and clergy in the chapter house of St. Friedeswide, in came Philip Repington, who there disavowed those conclusions and assertions in this form. In the name of God, amen. I, Philip Repington, canon of the House of Leicester, acknowledging one Catholic and apostolic faith, do curse and disavow all heresy, namely the heresies and errors here underwritten, condemned and reproved by the canonical decrees and by you, most reverend Father, touching which I have been defamed till now, condemning moreover and reproving both them and the authors of them. I do confess the same to be Catholically condemned. And I swear also by these holy evangelists, which here I hold in my hand, and do promise never by any persuasions of men, or by any hereafter to defend or hold as true any of the said conclusions underwritten, but do and will stand and adhere in all things to the determination of the Holy Catholic Church and to yours in this behalf. Over and besides all those who stand contrary to the faith, I pronounce them with their doctrine and followers worthy of the everlasting curse. And if I myself shall presume at any time to hold or preach anything contrary to the premises, I shall be content to abide the severity of the canons, subscribed by my own hand of my own accord, Philip Repington. And thus he was discharged and afterward made Bishop of Lincoln, and became at length the most bitter and extreme persecutor of this side of all the other bishops within the realm. After the abjuration of Repington, John Ashton was immediately brought in. Appearing before the Archbishop and prelates, he did in like form of words abjure as Repington had done. We read of John Ashton that afterwards he was cited and condemned by Thomas Arundel, Archbishop of Canterbury, but whether he died in prison or was burned, we have no certainty. As for Nicholas Hereford, he did not appear during this time of convocation, and therefore was excommunicated, against which he appealed from the Archbishop to the King and Council. The Archbishop would not admit it, but caused him to be apprehended and put in prison. He escaped out of prison, returning again to his former exercise and preaching as he did before, though in as covert and secret manner as he could. Upon which the Archbishop, thundering out his bolts of excommunication against him, sent to all pastors and ministers, commanding them in all churches and on all festival days to proclaim the excommunication against him to all men. Not content with this, he addressed his letter to the king, requiring the aid of his temporal sword. See and note, reader, the seraphical charity of these priestly prelates towards the poor redeemed flock of Christ. We will pick that up in our next review. Blessed Lord, cause us to seek holiness of life and obedience to you. May we be energized and courageous in that faith and in that obedience. Help us to root out errors and lies and covetousness and thefts and murders. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.